let's take a look at some of the supports and raft features in FlashPrint. We have this odd-shaped model here. Now, when I rotate to look underneath, I notice there's a couple issues right away. There's no blue area touching the surface. It's probably because right at the crosshairs of that grid, there's a single point touching the build plate. So that model is not going to stay upright very long as it's printing. Another thing I'm noticing is that there are some overhangs here. Now, those areas should automatically be highlighted in red to draw your attention to the fact that there's an issue. But if your slicer does not show them automatically, you can turn on that feature by clicking View, the View menu, and then going down to Show Steep Overhang and enable it. So now you can see when I look at the model from the bottom, those two jutting areas are completely solid red, and also the bottom of the sphere is red, but not the entire curvature of the sphere. Because generally speaking, a rule of thumb is that a 3D printer can handle a 45-degree angle. Right? So once it reaches that angle, even though there's a slight overhang, the printer can handle it without the filament sagging down. And that's because of the walls of the print, mostly, right? The way the model prints, it prints the, if you have two walls, say, it prints the interior wall first and then the exterior wall. So as you're building up each successive layer, the layer on top can rest on the layer below and work its way up. But if this angle is less than 45 degrees, as measured from the build plate, then that angle is just too steep for that effect to work. So this entire bottom of the sphere would need to be supported. So we can add supports by going over to the supports icon and clicking it. And we have a couple different options as far as supports type. The default is probably set on your slicer to this branch option, but you also have a pillar option. So let's just stick with the default for now, and we can click Auto Supports, and you see that the slicer adds supports. So it looks kind of strange. You can see there's a lot of support at the bottom, but not even all the way. It's not really covering all of the red, so there still may be an issue there. And if I try to zoom in on these features that jut out, again, you can see that not all of the red is covered, and I've got a bunch of points there. Now, to see more clearly exactly what's going on, I can move the slider on the right-hand side, and what it does is it actually kind of hides the model itself, so you can see just the supports. So again, if I zoom in, you can see what's happening with this jutting feature is that there are a bunch of individual points of the support upon which the bottom flat layer of that jutting feature is being printed. So not the best solution. I mean, basically what's happening is the model would be bridging from this point to this point to this point as it's being printed. So I'm going to Move the slider back down, zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to clear all of the supports, and I'm going to switch to pillar type and auto supports. Okay, so now we see that, well, some of the top of the red area is still not being covered, so that may or may not be problematic. But we can see we've got a much more complete coverage of that jutting feature there. And again, if I move the slider up to hide the model, you can see that there's a nice flat surface that bottom flat surface will print on. However, down at the bottom here, we've got a bunch of pillars, essentially, with square tops that this round feature is going to sit in. So perhaps not ideal in that regard. Another thing to notice between the two different types of supports, you'll see that these supports are not only touching the model in the area that they're providing support, but they're also resting on the model itself. If I clear and go back to branch and auto supports, you can see the way that those work is that the branch snakes around in this weird fashion, but it doesn't actually touch the model, right? So you're not going to have any marring of the side surface of the model. But the trade-off is that you may not have as clean of a surface there. So I'm going to clear these supports and go back because, of course, if I look at this model, perhaps there's another orientation I can use that will require less support. So I'll click rotate, and I'll rotate around the y-axis 90 degrees. I can just jump by 90 degrees by clicking that button. And if I rotate, whoops, I've got a lot more support here. So that's probably not great, but I'll rotate another 90 degrees and rotate again. And okay, so now the only red area is those features that are jutting out. So I will look at it more closely, and I can see I've got a blue dot now on the bottom where the model is resting on the build plate. Which is better than a single point, but still not nearly enough to hold up this model. But let's go ahead and add our supports. Let's say we'll go with the pillar supports, auto supports. All right, so much better. The only place that the supports are touching this model are underneath where the support is needed, so that's good. Now, you'll see that you can manually add and remove supports. So if I wanted to add a support, I would click add and then find where I want the support. Let's say I want, that to be supported there, and I click, and that support is added. And likewise, I can remove individual supports by clicking remove and clicking to remove. And I can remove any of the automatically generated supports as well. But in this case, I want them all to be there. So I'll click back. Okay, I'll click start slicing. I'll keep the defaults for now and see what happens. Slice preview. Okay, so you can see the supports are colored in this blue-green. You can see my skirt in red. So if I use the layer slider to see layer by layer what's going on, let's see if I can move this over, tilt it, and look at that. We can see that the supports are printed, and then the first layer of the overhanging features are printed, and likewise the rest of the model goes up without any problem. Okay, let's rotate this back. So even though this sort of inverted cone shape of the model is at an angle, the angle relative to the print bed is greater than 45 degrees, so there's no support that's needed for that whole area, right? I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to choose View, Orthographic, and Top View, and then zoom in and use the layer slider to go down so that we can see how the supports are being printed. So even though they displayed as a series of square tubes, the way they're actually printed is in this zigzag configuration, and you can see how thin that line is. So that may be problematic as far as sticking to the bed and providing any real stability to the model as it's printed. Now, they designed this way on purpose so that the supports can be easily broken off when the print is complete. And the way that the top of the support, let's see if I can get there, 198, layer 198, 190 is when the first layer of this overhanging feature is printed. And then if I use the second slider, I can see move by move how it's printed. So the outline or the shell is printed first, and then you can see the bottom surface is printed in a diagonal that bridges over the top of that zigzagging support feature. All right, close preview. So we're still concerned that this model may not be stable when it's printing because we only have this small area at the bottom of the cone that's touching the build plate, and we have these support features here that are actually very thin lines. So, whoops. If we click Start Slicing again, one thing we can do is we can add a raft. And you can control the width of the raft by increasing or decreasing this number here. I'll keep it at 5 millimeters for now and see how it looks. But I need to enable the raft. We'll say yes and slice. Of course, it doesn't look any different until I click Slice Preview. And now you can see this purple area here. It's put a raft under both support areas and also under the model. And so this distance between the outer wall of the model and the outer wall of the raft is 5 millimeters. So if I were to increase that to 10, then you'd have, a much wider surface that it's sitting on. But assuming I have proper bed leveling and adhesion, this raft should probably be enough to keep that model steady. But if you have any question about it, don't be afraid to add more area there. One other thing I'll point out, recall that when we looked at the support from the top, it was sort of a zigzag pattern, right? We can control that. So if I go under the Supports tab, support type is linear, which is what we want, but the path shape is polyline. So for instance, if I change that to grid and slice preview, let's see, drag this down. I'm still on orthographic. I'm going to go to top view, move that up, zoom in, and then go down. So you can see the supports now, instead of that zigzag pattern, are printing in this grid pattern. And so that'll be a little more stable, which is good. Perhaps a little more difficult to remove from the model, though, because you can see it's got this solid box outline, which is adding stability, but might also be a little more difficult to remove. One thing you can do for special circumstances, if you really want to have as flat a bottom surface as possible, is you can add some top layers to the support. So if I do that, we'll see what's happening as the support is being built, and 6, 7, oops, I'm trying to go one layer at a time here. 7, 8, 9. There we go. So at layer 191, so this area is not the bottom of the model itself. It's actually the top of the support. So it's building a solid surface, essentially, for the bottom of the overhanging section to build off from. So that should provide a very flat bottom to that surface. Now, of course, that can be particularly tricky because you have a lot of surface area here now for the support potentially to stick to your model and be very difficult or even impossible to get off, to remove from the model. But you have some control of that as well because there's the space to model Z option for support. So this is in the Z direction, up and down. The default is 0.2 millimeters, so the supports don't actually touch the model. There's a little minute gap between the top of the support and the bottom of your model. And you can increase that. So to make it really obvious, I'm just going to bring it all the way up to its maximum, 1 whole millimeter, which you would not want to do because that's going to definitely resulting in some sagging filament. But I'll do front view and zoom in. So you can clearly see that there's a big gap now between the top of the support and the bottom of the overhanging section. So we can close and go back. So now you can fine-tune this number, this gap, so that the support will come off of the model, will be removable from the model relatively easily, but that it will still provide the proper support that you need so that you have a nice clean feature. So now you can't even really see. It's a minute gap. Oops, I'm sorry, because we're in slides preview. You can see it, but it's a lot smaller, right? Right now that's a 0.3 millimeter gap. Very tiny. And we can see here, it looks like this corner of the support is actually touching the model. If for some reason you don't want that to happen, there's the space to model X and Y, and you can increase that gap so that it doesn't touch the model at all. So you've got a lot of options to fine-tune the supports and rafts on your model. And as with any aspect of 3D printing, minute changes can make all the difference in the world. You might print a model, and you can't get the rafts off, and you can't get the supports off. They're just sticking, and it's just impossible. Just tweaking a couple settings a tiny bit can make all the difference between having that issue and being able to remove them quite easily. One last thing I guess I'll mention here, since I'm using rafts, I don't really need that priming line, that skirt that's printing. It's overkill. The reason for the skirt is to get the filament flowing and clear out any blobs that might be accumulated on the nozzle before it actually starts on your print. But the process of printing the raft will accomplish the same thing. So, it's a minor issue, but I could go back into additions, and here's where the pre-extrusion, the skirt is. So if I say no, and slice preview, you can see that skirt is now gone.